Hello. Just when you thought it was safe to come back to BookTube, here I am, cropping up again. It's the first time in a wee while. However, today we have a treat. I have scissors. I have a box of books. I'm going to apply the scissors to the books and then hopefully apply my brain to telling you about them, showing you them. Shall we have a look? Getting that. Okay. This is looking promising. Okay. First one out of the box, W.H. Auden. Collected shorter poems, 1927 to 1957. Part of my ideal to read through everything he has written. This is simply the poetry. He's also written plays. He's also written important essays. And these are only his collected and shorter poems. So lots more to come. Next, Art, the Whole Story. How about that for a comprehensive title? Hundreds and thousands of years of art described. General editor is Stephen Farthing, printed by Tennyson and Hudson. The sign of quality, or one of them. Here's a book I have which probably nobody else watching has, because it's a friend who's an artist had an exhibition. This is her catalogue, Our Golden Thread by Jacqueline Stewart. She's based in Scotland, and it's her artwork. I think I did a video about visiting the exhibition, and she's thinking in terms of about life and our lives. Next, another art book, Barbara Ray, Scottish artist, Times and Places. Love the colour. There's a kind of simplified flattening of perspective. Never boring. She's also done a fantastic book of her journeys to the one of the poles. I'm going to say North Pole, I think. I also saw it in the RSA in Edinburgh, and it was massive. Huge canvases. And there wasn't a dull inch in any of them either, so amazing. Okay, this looks like it's a book about film, but do not be deceived. In person, World Poets, filmed and edited by these people, Nick Astley. So it's Blood Axe, the publisher, one of the key publishers for poetry in the UK. At the back there are DVDs which are, I think, slightly wandered astray from it. But the poets featured, for those of you who are interested in poetry, include Thomas Transtromer, who won the Pulitzer, no, not Pulitzer, he won a very important literary prize, insert here afterwards, and was always going to win it. So we've also got people who talk like Thomas Van Clova, Jan Kaplinski, Cohen, Thomas Lux, you've probably heard of him, Simon Armitage, well known in the UK. We've got Moniza Alvi, Antonella Aneda, Jean Binta-Breeze, Anna Blandiana, Dan Chiasson, Polly Clark, Stuart Collin, Peter Didsbury, Katie Donovan, Tishani Doshi, Ruth Fainlight. Oh, it keeps going on. Okay, here's some of the more famous ones. Caroline Forche, Philip Gross, Kerry Hardy, Robert Hass, John Hegley, a very good comic poet, performance poet in Britain. Rita Ann Higgins, Matthew Hollis, Jenny Joseph, very famous for Warning, her poem which is all about when she gets older she's going to wear purple. Esther Morgan, and so on. There's 4 DVDs. So many people, and it goes across the world in terms of poets. Obviously, the world of poets. So although there are many that are British American, there are also lots that have been translated from other languages. So this is an opportunity to hear. And the DVD lets you actually see them in person, reading their poems. I think quite often they're in their own homes as well. And in somebody's house, you always get that sense of who the person is, what they like, and their style. So this needs to be put somewhere where I can read a new poet daily, pretty much. Here's a book I've raved about, and I still rave about because it's fantastic. Romantic Moderns by Alexandra Harris. Subtitle, English Writers, Artists and the Imagination, from Virginia Woolf to John Piper. Again, Thames and Hudson. This book is just fabulous. If you're interested in the moderns, 1930s, if you're interested in English literature and culture, there's lots to do also about country houses, English country houses, and that kind of style and the way people lived. And it's all wound together because a lot of these people with glorious photographs and, of course, of artworks. It's thinking about what is showing in the pictures, why, what idea are people growing into, what are they valuing at a particular time, why is that? And as usual, when you read a really good art history book, you start to see how wildly different styles and writers and artists and culture are formed, and that quite often they're friends or utter competitors and rivals and so forth. Really thick book. I was fortunate enough to get it second hand, but it's so well written as well. It's enjoyable to read, and you just come out of it knowing so much more. Warm recommend. Here's another warm recommend. The Great Modern Poets. Anthology of the Essential by Michael Schmidt, published by Greenfinch. And what you get is a few poems, a little introduction, and it really flies through them. For example, here's Robert Frost, about whom endless amounts have been written. So you would get this little potted biography. Then you turn the page and immediately you're into the poems. Okay. Then you turn the page and it's Edward Thomas and it's moved on. It also tends to be done in roughly date order, so you can follow through movements in history or of poetry. Absolutely fantastic. If you're starting, if you want to start reading modern poets, like 20th century poets mostly, and you don't know where to begin, this will take you there, give you a wide scope view, and then from that you can decide who you want to read more of. If you're interested more in how to write, here's one of those practical books. It's on the title, How to Be a Poet, a 21st Century Guide to Writing Well, Joe Bell and Jane Cummane, with special guest writers, and those special guest writers are other well-known poets giving insights and comments. And the titles of the chapters, they're all short. How to learn from art and artists, how to start a poem, on the first draft, on the 3rd, 7th and 53rd draft is another chapter. How to submit your poems, why publish your poems, on success, how to stand out in the submissions pile, all that stuff you really want to know. And because it's written by two poets, they had the genius idea of doing a chapter about, so that you get different styles and a different voice on the same basic helpful themes. Now, when we're talking poetry, we need, of course, to have Faber and Faber. This is collected poems by Wendy Cope. Wendy Cope is probably better known for having an outrageous runaway success with her very first book of poetry called Making Cocoa for Kingsley Amis, which she knew was a lovely idea, but she couldn't think of a whole poem for it. So she made it the title of her first book. And it was a complete runaway success, partly because she was humorous. You would read what she said, you would laugh, but it was witty. There was a brain behind, there was thinking behind it. And she was very good at doing completely different styles of poetry, the layout, the rhyme, the rhythm patterns and so forth. So she really knew what she was doing. And this book appeared last year. And I just happened to hear a podcast where she was interviewed and liked the sound of her and got it. For writing, The Artist's Way. A course in discovering and recovering your creative self by Julia Cameron. And it is a course. It's very kind of, I was going to say chattily written, but that makes it sound like it's very carelessly written, but it's not. It's like somebody there encouraging you. You have quotes in each margin, which I think is always helpful, and it takes you through a program of weeks. Let me see, on things that will help you. Week 12, and take you straight from, I feel vaguely creative, but I'm not quite sure. Am I being overconfident? Blah, blah, blah. Am I a writer? Can I call myself a writer? Am I a filmmaker? Can I call myself a filmmaker? You know, whatever branch of the art you're in, this kind of loosens you up, gets your mojo going, builds your confidence, and gives you habits of creating and feeding your ideas systems so that you can keep making. Poetry. Catching Life by the Throat, How to Read Poetry and Why. Poems from 8 Great Poets by Josephine Hart. Josephine Hart, bless her, set up public readings of poetry because she said it's not enough to look at it on the page. You really need to hear it and hear it read well. So this again is another great book because she says from 8 great poets. So if your ear caught on that, you're going to say, okay, this is going to introduce me to a whole group of poets all at the same time. And she's got W.H. Auden, Emily Dickinson, T.S. Eliot, Rudyard Kipling, Philip Larkin, Marianne Moore, Sylvia Plath, and William Butler Yeats. Yeats, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce that. So you get beautifully printed poems, nice big font. And I think she also gives a little bit of a bio. She does. Same kind of thing. A little bit of a bio and then straight into the poems. Warmly recommended as an anthology starter. Also programme became public performances in London, which I think are still going on, where you could just go and hear poetry read. Now, Seamus Heaney, I've come too late in life, and it's really through his letters that I have been caught much more than his poetry initially. And then through reading the letters, I liked the person, I liked his sense of humour, and I was intrigued. So I then went and looked at the poems. His letters were produced, I think it was, not sure it's this year or last year. First published 2023, fair enough. This, of course, is the paperback, so probably the hardback was 2023, edited by Christopher Reid, The Letters of Seamus Heaney. Now, it's not small, but nobody is saying you have to start and read it all in 5 minutes. He's writing to other poets. Here's Michael Longley, just an utter random. Jill Thomas, commenting on their poems, Brian Friel, Seamus Dean, Charles Monteith, and the business of how he got published, who he worked with, who he was friends with, and he had a lovely sense of humour, and he had an interesting life because he worked between both Ireland and America. He went and lectured a lot in America, and I think that's the real way to become an outstanding success, because I'm thinking also of T.S. Eliot, that he was born in America, came to live in Britain, but also kind of had a presence and fan base in both of those major English-speaking countries for poetry. So yeah, I warmly recommend The Letters of Seamus Heaney for a big read you can dip and dive into. And if you want to then read his poems, there's quite a lot in print. Ooh. But this will take you the background. It starts off from the time he's getting his first collection published by Faber and Faber, of course. That's well-known publisher for poems, if you're going to get one. And here I have a huge book on art history, which was based on a TV series, I think back in the 1980s, by Robert Hughes, who was a kind of gruff Australian who called a spade and was not taken in lightly, and he just presented it in such a way you could understand, but it made you feel smart. And The Shock of the New was the name of both the book and TV series. Again, huge book, amply illustrated. You're going to see some familiar famous paintings, I'm sure, and something to dip and dive into and give yourself a whole education in art history. Because the subtitle is called Art and the Century of Change. This is an updated and enlarged edition with 269 colour illustrations by Thames and Hudson, our friends, and copyright 1980 and 1991. So this is 1991. He's no longer with us, so I don't think there'll be another updated version. When a blog becomes a fantastic book, it's apparently called a blook. This did, and it was about poetry and about the writer's life. By Anthony Wilson, called Life-Saving Poems, by Blood Axe Books, already mentioned, as a great poetry publisher. And the particular scheme he did was he decided to feature a different poet each chapter or entry in the blog as it was, and then he would choose sometimes not the most famous but the one he genuinely liked, and then he wrote a little bit in his blog about what it meant to him personally. So you get his story as well as a really well written important poem. So it works as an autobiography as well as a selection of poems, and so you get things like this, a poem and then what it meant to him. So I'll give you a little bit of an excerpt just at random. This is Thursday I'm recording this on, so it's Poetry Thursday. Tides. The evening advances, then withdraws again, leaving our cups and books like islands on the floor. We are drifting, you and I, as far from one another as the young heroes of these two novels we have just laid down. For that is happiness, to wander alone, surrounded by the same moon, whose tides remind us of ourselves, our distances, and what we leave behind. The lamp left on, the curtains letting in the light. These things were promises. No doubt we will come back to them. That's by Hugo Williams from his collected poems, published by Faber and Faber 2002. And this is what then the author writes straight after. I can remember exactly where I was when I first read this poem. It was on the balcony of the squat of my friend Duncan Kramer in Bromley in the summer of 1984. The house had been earmarked for demolition to make way for a ring road. It was shared by Duncan with 5 other art students, each of whom attended Ravensbourne College of Art on furniture or product and graphic design courses. It was perhaps the most chaotic house I had ever seen, with bikes and car repair tools littering the hallways and landing, no locks on the bathroom or lavatory doors, you had to claim occupancy with a post-it note, and a constant mix of music seeping through the pores of each floor and ceiling. It was through Duncan that I had first met the work of Seamus Heaney. One winter he walked around with a copy of Fieldwork in his donkey jacket pocket, and now I was meeting other poets who were not on the syllabus of the English literature degree I was doing. Paul Muldoon, Tom Paulin, Douglas Dunn, Michael Longley, Derek Mahan and Hugo Williams. They were all to be found between the pages of a tiny looking paperback, The Penguin Book of Contemporary British Poetry, edited by Blake Morrison and Andrew Motion and published only 2 years previously. We were sitting on his balcony with coffee and the papers, having got up late one Saturday morning, when I began glancing through this little book of poems, intrigued by the artwork on the front pages and front cover, and drawn in by the lure of reading more Heaney. To the sound of weekend shopping and ordinary South London traffic, I read these lines of quiet longing and utter clarity, feeling as though someone had taken a look inside my head and made a snapshot of it for all to see. And so it goes on. So a poet writing imaginatively with interesting words about other poets, and having set himself the task that he will only use one poem from whichever poet he quotes, is great. You will also hear his encounters and friendships with other poets as well, which adds to it all because you're finding out about it, about other people as well. I'll just move this down here. Okay, the big one, Dante, the Divine Comedy. As you may already know, I'm still reading this, stuck halfway with Dante. I need to put this to one side to remind myself to read more. And let's see, what else have we got? Oh yes. The Writing and Critique Group Survival Guide by Becky Levine. How to give and receive feedback, self-edit and make revisions. Very practical, goes through different ways in which a group works well or it doesn't work well. Are you giving too much info? Are you not? How to run the group, how to get started, taking notes, giving critiques. Brilliant, brilliant book. It is complete with worksheets, sample critiques and examples. This gives you tools to hone your editing skills. Absolutely true. Just a brilliant book. Published by Writers Digest Books of Cincinnati, Ohio. And it was published in 2010 if you're trying to find it. I suggest looking for online second-hand publishers. Okay. When poetry crosses over into being faith-based. Finally comes the poet, Daring Speech for Proclamation by Walter Brueggemann, who's better known as a theology teacher, lecturer, thinker. Here in the back it says he's McFeeder, Professor of Old Testament at Columbia Theological Seminary. But he writes in a very imaginative way. Finally comes the poet. And it actually starts with a quote from Walt Whitman, Leaves of Grass. After the seas are all crossed, as they seem already crossed, after the great captains and engineers have accomplished their work, after the noble inventors, after the scientists, the chemists, the geologists, the ethnologists, finally shall come the poet, worthy of that name. The true Son of God shall come singing his songs. So, he's talking about the uncomfortableness, poetry in a prose flattened world, about what poetry is doing, how it's helping us to think more deeply. Several chapters delivered originally as lectures, and the titles are Numbness and Ache, Alienation and Rage, Restlessness and Greed, and Resistance and Relinquishment. So it's not just something fluffy, shall we say. It is quite deep and thoughtful. Speaking of which, Edward Hirsch, in the last year really came upon him, which I should have done. How to Read a Poem and Fall in Love with Poetry is his probably better known book, but he's always being interviewed in exciting programs on YouTube about poetry. It's just fantastic. And this will give you examples, take you through poetry again if you're thinking about starting to get into it. And then at the back there's further reading, which is like a poetry course if you want to do it. And he also gives you a really good list of terms used in poetry, explains what they are, gives you an example. So it's lots of books in one. I tried it one time and I just didn't get into it. And then I did some academic study, and came to it and thought it was much lighter reading. So I think it's a book that if you get it, you'll find it will be a time when you want to read it if you're interested in poetry or writing poetry. Staying on the topic of faith and poetry, Malcolm Guite is notable practicing poet at the moment. Faith, Hope and Poetry, Theology and the Poetic Imagination, which he wrote this book published by Ashgate. Ashgate Studies in Theology, Imagination and the Arts in 2012. And the titles, just to give you a flavour, are The Dream of the Rood, Seeing Through Dreams. 2, Truth and Feeling, Story and Play in a Midsummer Night's Dream, so if you want a bit of Shakespeare. 3, Understanding Light, Ways of Knowing in the Poems of Sir John Davies. Chapter 4, John Donne, George Herbert, A Second Glance, Transfigured Vision. And Chapter 5, Henry Vaughan and Milton, Visions of the Invisible. Chapter 6, Journeying with Coleridge to the Source of the Imagination. So 7 is Geoffrey Hill, Thomas Hardy, Philip Larkin, Doubting Faith, Reticent Hope. And finally, chapter 8, Seamus Heaney, The Replenishing Fountain, Hope and Renewal in the Poetry of Seamus Heaney. And I have read this, I loved it, find it very approachable and opening deeper things in poetry. Just very good. The Art of Curating Worship, Reshaping the Role of Worship Leader by Mark Pearson. This should be read by anyone in church leadership because it's talking about curating art and applying that to the idea of curating a service and also having art as part of the community of a church, discussing its faith or lack thereof. So he, in this book particularly, puts forward the idea of having Stations of the Cross exhibitions of art pieces on the different stations of the cross, made by people in the church, not necessarily, trained artists, but people who have an idea, think about a theme, pick it, and then you would do your station, and at the same time other people would as well. And there's around about 12, I think. It can vary slightly. But you would have things that are like in little installations, like a little pile of objects or music being played or a poem to read or that sort of thing. This inspired me to do my own Stations of the Cross called Love, Loss, Hope back in about 2014, and including many artists' works, some video, a little soundtrack that was poems, also in the same themes, and sculpture, all different kinds of art. It was engrossing, and then I repeated it in a smaller way the next year in a smaller space. So I'm utterly fascinated by that, where the combination of the arts comes together and where it's exploring a common theme, but it's lots of different voices and thoughts. I absolutely love that. So that's most of what I've done as a curator, and just love. A Syllable of Water, 20 Writers of Faith Reflect on Their Art, edited by Emily Griffin. Many of these writers are American, so might be better known, slightly better known. Lucy Shaw, Emily Griffin herself, James Calvin Shapp, Doris Betts, Erin McGraw, Scott Cairns, poet, Philip Yancey, better known as a prose writer, Richard J. Foster, similarly contemplative, spiritual writing, Eugene Peterson, famous for translating the Bible into the Message translation. And they're writing about all different kinds of ways of thinking about writing and different forms like novel, memoir, playwriting, poetry, journalism, spiritual writing, translation. So a friend gave me this. I'm so glad that they did. It's published in America by Paraclete Press. That's Paraclete Press, and the year, it will be quite a while, 2008, printed by the Chrysostom Society. Here's another fabulous book. The Poetics of Poetry film, if you're interested in visuals going along. There's a lot of, with the words, there's a lot of poetry festivals now on at the moment. And it's called Film Poetry, Video Poetry, Lyric Voice, Reflection by Sarah Tremlett with over 40 contributors. It's a major survey of the field and well worth looking at. I'm, again, at the back, you've got Artists and Authors Index, goes on for pages. The references, let me show you how many there are. This is how worthwhile it is if you're interested in making or thinking about or critiquing. And there's examples of film festivals and so forth as well. So the references run from 329 to 370. Really good. Lots, and as I say, those 40 contributors are telling you how they made their films. It's practical, as well as being analytical and academic. Just, if you're interested in poetry film, that's definitely a book to have. if you're interested in writing poetry, starting from scratch, never done it before, scared about writing it, Stephen Fry. The Ode Less Travelled, Unlocking the Poet Within. He makes it all very understandable. He's an excellent teacher. He's never boring. He uses humour. There are little examples at the end of each chapter. He demystifies it. Yes, you do have to do the work, but it's well worth just getting a cheap exercise book, a cheap biro, pencil, whatever you fancy, and just reading and doing the exercises at the end of each chapter. And through doing that, you will find at the end of the day you've practiced writing in a whole lot of different range of poetry styles. Something different. The Home Edit, Conquering the Clutter and Style. It's on Netflix if you have Netflix, but if you don't, I don't, but I just loved the way everything is broken down and sorted out. It's basically divide and conquer, almost the whole of it. Your pantry obviously looks like that as well as everybody else's, yeah. But it's a great idea to have a starting point when you sort of think, oh, where do I begin? To literally physically see somebody has set it out in storage, labelling different things. If you want an excuse to buy a labeler, I think that book will give you all the excuses you need. Staying with the topic of home, The Comforts of Home, Thrifty and Chic Decorating Ideas for Making the Most of What You Have by Caroline Clifton-Moog, double barrel name. It's an older book, but I do like things like this that are so simple that you can then just update it by choosing the colours that are more likely to be around at the moment. And I got it second hand. And let's see, when was it published? 2010, so it's 12 years old, which is like forever ago. But then on the other hand, when you've got things like this that are quite classic, they're not really dating that much, to be honest. You're not going to be regarded as being madly out of date, because some of this is quite nostalgic anyway. So you're obviously aiming for the look of a English country house style. It always comes back to that, doesn't it? But it can also be quite funky and inviting. So, okay. Haunted, Modern Writers and the Struggle for Faith by Richard Harries. Haunted by Christ. So these are people who are writing as people of faith, or people who are struggling, maybe growing up in the background of faith and just not sure about Christianity, and that's fine. So each chapter is there's 15 chapters, each one a different writer. I'll just run through the names. You can imagine probably when you hear the name, kind of where they are in that whole spectrum of thinking through faith and writing. Dostoevsky, Emily Dickinson, Gerald Manley Hopkins, Edward Thomas, T.S. Eliot, Stevie Smith, Samuel Beckett, W.H. Auden, William Golding, R.S. Thomas, Edwin Muir and George Mackay Brown, Elizabeth Jennings, 4 Catholic novelists, Graham Greene, Flannery O'Connor, Shusaku Endo, and Evelyn Waugh, C.S. Lewis and Philip Pullman, and finally Marilynne Robinson, Christian Contrarian. And there is an index at the end, which is pretty reasonable, and there's notes on each chapter. So each chapter will have maybe, say, 35, 36 notes, quotes. So just utterly at random, because random is fun, isn't it? Let's be honest. And if you had this book in your hand, you would be doing something the same, flicking through. Chapter 14, note 18. I once did a study day with Philip Pullman, in which I subjected his trilogy to a critique, and he examined my book, God Outside the Box, Why Spiritual People Object to Christianity. Interestingly, Philip Pullman refused to define himself as a spiritual person. On the other hand, he did say that while God, that is the God in whom Christians claim to believe, was not part of the circle of his experience, he acknowledged that there might be a reality outside his awareness. In short, a genuinely agnostic position, though it includes strongly rejecting what he is clearly aware of and morally disapproves of, the church and its beliefs as he has encountered them. And that's immediately followed by the next note, 19, Rowan Williams, an article in The Guardian, 10th of March 2004. So a rich mix of backgrounds. Next, a humour book. I tell you the author is P.G. Wodehouse. You probably don't need to hear much more. Right Ho Jeeves. Got the second hand recently. As ever. Original price of the book. Would you like to guess? The original price of the book, according to this paperback, back in, well, this one was printed in 1962, first published in 1934, considerably earlier. In 1960, I'm lying to you, it says 1988 is the most recent date in this. Okay, 1988, £2.95. £3 full price for a paperback by a fantastic author. Wow, happy days. Now, a book that has another way of introducing you to poetry across looking at lots of different ones it's a printer of a column that ran in a newspaper where each week the poet Ruth Padel would choose a poem and explain how it worked as a poem. 52 ways of looking at a poem for every week of the year. And I find this eye-opening. I probably could do with reading it again. You get, as ever, the poem and then the comments on it. Poem here. Comments. This one has got longer comments where it's explaining things like how the words on the page make the sound of what the poem is trying to convey. This is talking about sonnets, so you get a wee bits about form of poetry as well. Brilliant. And because it's once a week, it's going to, it'll flow, the time will go. The next one is Popular Poetry, a book of anthology popular poetry. Oh, that's interfering a bit here. And it's foreword by Roger McGough from BBC Radio 4. Poetry Please is a programme where people write in and say, I would like to have this poem read. So it's a whole big book, lots and lots of poetry, British poems all across the years, published 2013. And again, brilliant way to find out a whole raft of new or even old names in terms of poetry, famous and to be famous. You'll find something you absolutely love in this. You cannot miss doing that. The numbers are in your favour. Okay. We're going to end with a book which is one of my all-time ever favourites. And I'm always dragging it into my BookTube videos because it's about creativity, how to make it happen, and it's also little bios of a vast array of fantastic creative women. Daily Rituals, Women at Work by Mason Curry. And here's some of the names you can see around. They're all the different arts. So you've got Dorothy Parker, so she was journalist and critic and just screenwriter as well. Coco Chanel, obviously clothes, fashion. Hilary Mantel, historical fiction. Virginia Woolf, literary fiction, and also her vital essay on A Room of One's Own. Zadie Smith, current, alive and well and writing novels. Charlotte Bronte, more classic novels. Frida Kahlo, well-known painter. Alice Walker, again, journalist. Nina Simone, famous singer. Patti Smith, again, another singer. There's more in the back. Barbara Hepworth, sculptor. Janet Frame, novelist. Jane Campion, filmmaker. Isabel Allende, novelist. Marie Curie, scientist. Louisa May Alcott, Victorian-y, Edwardian writer fiction. Miranda July, more, she works really more across the arts, but mostly with words and film. Isaac Dinesen, who wrote Farm in Africa, Farm in Africa, whatever was that book called, I've forgotten the name of the film now, but anyway, novelist. Rose, and short stories, fantastic short stories. Rosa Bonheur was a sculptor or painter of horses and so forth back in Victorian times. Kate Chopin is, I think she's a sculptor as well, despite her name being that of a famous composer. You get a picture of them. For example, here is Barbara Hepworth, who managed to have a couple of marriages and triplets and still produce an incredible body of work. So there we go, you get her basic bio. Lots of good quotes from the person themselves. It's not just what's trendy or why she was a celebrity. This is her at her work, how she found the time. And all of these people have been examined by Mason Curry just looking at their lives to see how and where, how and where they find the time to make their work, their life's work. Did they compromise in different things? How did they get the time? Bearing in mind that they, like everyone, only has 24 hours in each day. So it's interesting because people are so vastly different, and he is showing the vastly different ways in which they made their artwork, and their artworks are vastly different because they're all different media. How about that for a box of books? And in case you're wondering, if you're new to this channel and you're thinking, gosh, Heather's so fortunate going out and buying all those books. I didn't buy them. I have shopped from my own closet, as it were. These books have been put in a box and moved. And this is me opening them again. And this box was marked favourite books. And actually, that's about right. These are books I will comment on a lot. And if you aren't convinced, type in that title on my YouTube channel and see. And you will also find other books that are similar about creativity and especially poetry and art history. And if that's your bag, I think you'll enjoy some of the things that I have recommended and looked at. So this is me signing off now. Bye for now. I'm recording using a new recording device, which I'm hoping will work well and will edit fine. And it's bye from now. Cheerio.